Good evening and welcome to the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers monthly webinar for the month of February 2023. This evening, we'll be having as our specially invited guest, Lieutenant Colonel Browne, who will be wearing his hat as the chairman of the Cooperative Coalition pertaining to the Barbados Energy Challenge and the FTC rate hearing. This is an issue, obviously, that's very topical to Barbadians at present, and we thought that it would be good to have some interaction on this topic at the technical level this afternoon. This is a CPD event, this is a continuous professional development event. It carries a value of 2 CPD points. Please contact our secretariat to have your CPD information forwarded to you should you wish to claim those points. Some general housekeeping rules. Please note that these sessions are ran as follows. We will introduce our presenter, who will make a presentation for between 30 and 40 minutes. We will then have an open session to our general audience to ask questions and interact with our guests. This is done either by raising your hand, at which time the moderator will acknowledge you and invite you to ask your question. Alternatively, you can post your question in the chat, and the moderator will ask the question on your behalf. We ask that you please mute your electronic device unless you're being asked or answering a question at the given point in time. Tonight's title is FTC BLPC rate hearing discussion. And it's being presented, as I said earlier, by Lieutenant Colonel Browne. Lieutenant Colonel Browne has been in the sector of electricity generation and everything to do with electricity for all his professional working life. He is a qualified electrical engineer and has worked in the field for several years. He's also been one of the pioneering founders within the cooperative movement, as well as wearing several hats over many years, from his involvement with the youth in the Barbados Cadet Corps, right through to his ongoing involvement with the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. He is certainly no stranger to us, hence why the introduction is going to be so short this afternoon. Recently, he has been elevated to the position of fellow within the association just this past December at our annual dinner. Just to give you a bit of background, first off, an understanding of the Fair Trading Commission. The Fair Trading Commission is the division that serves as one of the guardians of consumers' rights. The officers of that division provide public education awareness, investigate consumers' complaints, and seek amicable resolutions where possible. The division also monitors any promotional material released by businesses. In terms of utility regulation, the Utility Regulation Division regulate 3 utility companies, those being Cable and Wireless Barbados Limited, the Barbados Light and Power Company Limited, and the Barbados Water Authority. The division oversees rates and service standards and investigates queries and complaints. I'm reading now directly from a caption on their website, and this is pertaining to the rate hearing. When the Barbados Light and Power Company Limited applied to the Fair Trading Commission for a review of electricity rates, the Commission, in addition to advising the public about the rate application, invited persons who were interested in participating in the rate review process to apply to be an intervener. 9 interveners have been accepted by the Commission. These include Barbados Association of Non-Governmental Organizations and the Barbados Consumer Research Organization, Inc., who are representing consumers in general, as well as several non-governmental organizations. Their interests relate primarily to the level of rate increases, its effects on consumers, and the overall performance and capital structure of the Barbados Light and Power. Focusing on specific interest groups are interveners Barbados Association of Retired Persons and the Barbados Small Business Association. They went on to indicate the individuals who will be participating. and to give some information pertaining to the other persons who will be interveners. In October of 2021, the Barbados Light and Power Company submitted a formal application to the Fair Trading Commission for an 11.9% increase in the base rate for electricity to customers. The rate application comes at a particularly interesting point in the energy history of Barbados, since the country is known to have adopted a high-profile national energy policy in 2019, which targets a revolutionary transformation of the island's energy framework from fossil-based to new carbon-neutral footing by the year 2030. The Barbados Association of Professional Engineers has from the start expressed strong support for government's ambitious policy, but has cautioned that the proposed transformation was a complex undertaking that needed professional leadership in a number of complex disciplines if it was to be successful. The Barbados Sustainable Energy Cooperative Society, Co-op Energy Barbados for short, happens to have as its president Lieutenant Colonel Browne, who is also the president of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. Co-op Energy has taken a very active role in the energy market as it relates to the BNEP. And in fact, the cooperative movement, pursuant on their express interests in investing in the new energy structure of Barbados, has been one of the vocal interveners in the recent rate case. We therefore have invited Lieutenant Colonel Browne, wearing his hat as the chairman of the Cooperative Coalition, to host this discussion on the Barbados Energy Challenge and the FTC rate hearing. The objective of this session is to update engineers on the background to the current status quo on the most recent decision issued by the FTC and on the coalition's vision of the way forward for Barbados. Colonel Browne will start by outlining the coalition's view of the energy situation, including the challenges that we currently face, what success can look like, the current status quo and why it is not satisfactory, the current rate hearing process, and the path forward as the cooperatives see it. This overview should take us about 40 minutes, and then we will invite our guests, you persons who are with us this evening in our audience, to engage Colonel Browne in questions and answers session. So without further ado, I would like to turn the session over to Lieutenant Colonel Browne. Over to you, sir.
Okay, good afternoon to you, Vincent, and to everyone. Thank you for your invitation and for this opportunity to actually share, especially with the engineering fraternity and with all our visitors, a perspective on the energy situation in Barbados that comes really from the cooperative movement. Can I go ahead and share my screen?
You can, sir.
Am I up?
You are?
Okay. So again, I said thank you for this opportunity. I'm particularly hopeful that this session will actually, selfishly, better prepare me for the upcoming sessions that we are going to have with cooperatives, who Mr. Halley Haynes and myself have the honor to have represented as interveners in the ongoing rate case. Of course, we're going to have to update our members on our findings and our concerns and get feedback from them. So this gives us an opportunity to actually feel out how, and to actually learn so that we can refine our presentation. I have to tell you that over the past year, I have had the opportunity to present various aspects of these issues to some different groups, and it has become clear to me that some of these matters are much too complex and certainly far too important to be really properly ventilated in a few minutes. So I really appreciate the opportunity to spend maybe half an hour or so to actually outline our perspectives and to show you our view of where the current situation is, and hopefully to share with you our vision for how this can be outstandingly successful for Barbados. I have to say, however, that so far, Oh, I have to click that. So far, we have had lots of questions with not many answers. And if I was to summarize our position with one statement, it would be that. And hopefully in the next 20 or 30 or 40 minutes, I can outline to you what these concerns are and maybe get some guidance from you as to how we can move forward. So, what I propose to cover this afternoon is to, first of all, these following areas. My objective is to convince you of these following areas. One, why energy, and I don't only mean in Barbados, I mean globally, is perhaps the most critical issue facing the future of mankind and needs to be addressed urgently. Two, how this pertains to Barbados with our present energy situation, why that is critical, and what government is seeking to do about it. Three, the challenges and the obstacles that currently prevent us from realizing the kind of vision that we actually have for Barbados. I want to talk a little bit about the Barbados National Energy Policy, which is government's declared policy for addressing these issues at the national level. Briefly on what the requirements for success would be, but definitely on where we are now and why the progress is so slow. And I'm going to show you how slow it is. And then I'm going to talk about the current rate hearing, its relevance to this whole thing that went before, and the path forward. I'm going to be fairly brief because I know that the audience is a fairly technical audience, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining issues, but I will at the same time try to be as comprehensive as possible. Let me start by talking about a little bit about energy just for context. Energy is perhaps the most basic and fundamental of all physical, scientific, and probably even spiritual concepts. In engineering and in science, we typically define it as the ability to do work. And we know that energy is an indispensable requirement for anything that needs to be done, whether it is in the form of physical work, heating, cooling, lighting, even thinking. But over and above this ability to do work, we know that energy is actually interchangeable with every physical thing that exists. We know that Albert Einstein, for example, famously demonstrated the relationship between energy and matter through his equation E = mc squared, which essentially says that everything that we know is, in the final analysis, energy. Energy is everything. The first law of science, first law of thermodynamics, speaks to energy. What it actually says is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's a very interesting concept. Basically, there is, always was, and always will be since time began and until time ends, a fixed and finite amount of energy in existence, which constitute everything that we know in the form of physical matter, work, heat, light, everything. That is an all-encompassing concept. The second law is interesting too, in that it defines another aspect of energy called entropy. So while energy is constant, this concept called entropy says that even though you have X amount of energy in a closed system, as time progresses, the effectiveness of that energy decreases with time. So if you had X joules of energy 10 years ago, and you have X joules of energy today, the amount of work that is available out of that X joules is reduced by this concept called entropy. And if you were to project this forward in time, as that graph tends to portray, it is not difficult to see where the final analysis it leads, chaos and death. A very interesting concept that may be worth a discussion some evening, but that's not what we're here about. What I really want to talk about is a particular form of energy called electrical power generation. And what I want to draw your attention to is these graphs on the screen. We already know that energy has become, over these last 100 years, the key driver of national development, and this is at a global level. The first graph, the line graph, shows the growth of electrical power in England in the last 100 years also. And it is measured in terawatts. A terawatt is being 400,000. So it goes up to about 400 terawatts, which is about 400,000 million megawatt hours. That is a lot of power. Across the whole world, let's have a look at the second graph. This is how electrical power energy has grown in the last century or so. And those figures are in what is called exajoules per year. An exajoule being 10 to the 18 joules. That is 10 with 18 zeros behind it, joules. This is the kind of quantity of electrical energy being harnessed by mankind to power development at the global level. So in the last century, the availability of public access to affordable electrical power on demand by ordinary citizens has driven changes in modern societies at a rate that would be impossible to assimilate by anybody except those of us who have lived through that experience. And these graphs show that in clear terms. It is obvious that this is not sustainable. So we live at a time where we have developed our world to a point where some drastic action needs to be taken to address and to put us in a sustainable path so that 100 years from now, there can be people thinking in terms of a future. So one of the points I want to make is that this kind of electrical energy growth has been driven across the world almost universally by an organizational concept called an electric utility, something similar to what Barbados Light and Power is. Communities have come to enjoy the convenience of safe, clean, efficient, and relatively cheap energy through these entities. What we have been doing is converting the chemical energy from fossil fuels into heat, and then converting that heat into electrical energy for generation to customers for our great convenience. The Barbados Light and Power Company in Barbados has been the regulated public utility that has actually undertaken that task extremely successfully in Barbados over the last 100 years. But BLPC is subject to is a regulated public utility. It is not a normal private company. It has been instituted under the laws of Barbados, and I've listed the relevant laws here. It is subject to public control, which is why, as the chairman in the introduction explained, that when they want to adjust rates or sell equipment or make any kind of major change, they actually need to apply to a public control board, in our case, the Fair Trading Commission. And this board is required to enlist public interest and comment in the form of interveners to ensure that all sides of the equations are balanced and that when decisions are taken, all interests are taken into consideration. So the Barbados Light and Power Company is a part of this global utility structure that has driven phenomenal growth in the energy availability through electrical power. And in Barbados, we've done that quite successfully. This utility business has enjoyed a successful and profitable history. And this is based to a large extent on the fact that it's protected monopoly status. I mean, much as I know there are people who have concerns about it, but what it has done, and this is not only in Barbados, but globally, is that it makes good economic sense in that because of the high capital investments that are required over long terms, the economies of scale of doing it this way have proven to be extremely efficient and economical. The specialized expertise needed for sustained high quality and reliable operations are then, we can leverage that through the utility. The specialized expertise is accessible on a much easier scale through the utility. And of course, the benefits of standardization of equipment, spares, technologies, and the importance of being able to, at the national level, prioritize customer requirements as a main objective has been key to the success. So essentially, the point I want to make is that electric utilities such as BLPC got to run their operations free of competition as decreed by law, and then they were awarded a guaranteed rate of return. Basically, whatever it costs them to do their operation and they will make a profit on the assets that they have invested in the operation. This is an important concept that I want to make sure that we all understand, because I'm going to come back to talk about why it is critical that we understand this and understand what we're doing when we move away from that. Now let's talk about challenges. Numerous challenges face the global community with respect to the global energy future, and Barbados is probably even more exposed than most for obvious reasons. The first in my book is that energy has become indispensable to society. We have constructed our societies now that without access to energy at the level produced by the utility, our current communities and societies will not be sustainable. That is a major issue that needs to be addressed. We cannot do it. We've put ourselves in a position where this is a must-have. At the same time, and this is why I touched on the volume, the global volume of energy being produced by electricity. This energy is being produced from fossil fuel. And we have been burning fossil fuel at a phenomenal rate. Just try to think that for every unit of electrical energy we produce, because of efficiency levels, we are actually consuming about 4 times that thermal energy from fossil fuels to produce that energy. In some cases more than that, less than 25% efficiency. This is not sustainable. And for a while now, scientists have been warning about the consequences. Every year, we are hearing of once-in-a-lifetime storms, floods, fires, even earthquakes. And all the science is now pointing to this being a consequence of the phenomenal changes we're making to the global atmosphere because of the use of fossil fuels. This has put extreme pressure on all governments across the world to do something about that, and no less so on the Barbados government. The question of prices of fuel, obviously, as it becomes indispensable, those people who supply put the clamp on, put the prices up, and people like Barbados are at their mercy. Typically, our fuel import bill is between $400 to $800 million per year. Because of the situation in Ukraine and the COVID situation last year, it passed $1 billion, according to the information that I actually have. And of course, this is all in foreign exchange, which is another blow to a country like Barbados. Faced with these issues, the Barbados government came up with an answer. This answer is called the Barbados National Energy Policy. It's a beautiful book, 100 and something pages, lots of really nice pictures. I would like to suggest to you that I can boil that book down to 4 concrete statements. The first one is that the government has set a policy that we will target a situation of being 100% carbon free by 2030, say 2030. 2030, let's say 2030. So those are 2 specific policies. 100%, not 60%, not 50%, not 35%, 100%. We're going for the whole hog, and we're doing it aggressively by 2030. The third clear policy coming out of the document is that in the new dispensation, there shall be a meaningful local participation in the new energy market. Now, this may sound like a goody two-shoes policy. It isn't. This is a completely practical implementation to the extent that you will be now pulling large volumes of energy from the environment in which people live. And it has been shown over and over globally that if you're going to do that successfully, those people who live in that environment have to be involved Otherwise, it will not work. So this is a brilliant strategy from the government that solves many problems, but it is actually a practical insert to ensure that this thing is likely to work. And finally, coming out of the policy, government has given the clear indication that all the current market players are to be included in the solution. So this is not meant to be a hammer, a heavy hammer. This is what we're going to do, take it or leave it. Government has indicated that what they want to do is to make this a cooperative, inclusive solution that brings all the stakeholders on board. I have to say that we have always found this policy to be, by global standards, impressive. If we were to achieve this, it would put Barbados in a position that is beyond belief, to be quite honest, for many reasons, which I can talk a little bit about as we go forward. But I can tell you this, there are very few other countries anywhere in similar circumstances to Barbados that even contemplate such a transformation. Most comparable, ambitious countries at the same stage we are at have set various ranges of carbon zero penetration from 20 to maybe 60 in some cases, 60 in the case of China, which is fairly ambitious. And the reason they have done that is a particularly simple reason. This is one of the most complex objectives that you can set for yourself. Let me try to touch a little bit on why did they pull out the top 10 aggressive countries across the world who have set targets for 100% or close to 100% renewable energy. If you can use Norway, for example, Norway has set a target, it's very similar to Barbados, 100% by 2030. But I want you to know that the current percentage of renewable energy in Norway is 98%. They're targeting to get the additional 3% in the same time frame that we want to move from where we are now, and where we were was in 2019 when this policy was launched was more like 5%, to 100% by 2030. This is like chalk and cheese. So we cannot compare ourselves with people like Norway or Costa Rica or Iceland. These are people who happen to sit on extremely valuable alternative energy resources, typically hydro, thermal, geothermal energy, or unusually active wind. These are the kind of people who were already in high numbers, Scotland, for example, and they're now seeking to move to 100%. So you can see that Barbados is actually in a completely different ball game by itself. Now, the point I want to make is that this conversion that has been targeted by Barbados is actually technically achievable. However, it is not simple. And this is what we have been saying at BAP for years now. It would be the most radical, complex, and I would suggest to you, dangerous undertaking that we would have contemplated in the last century. And it would be our equivalent, I would suggest to you, of when John F. Kennedy decided in 1961 to set a US policy of sending a man to the moon and bringing him back by 1970. This would be of that. So doable, but only because we have outstandingly talented people, because Barbados is in a position where we have a history of successful utility that have actually been able to do outstanding things. If you put all those together and you get everything to work, we could actually get that man on the moon and get him back. But any idea that this is a simple matter, try to apply that to the man on the moon and you will see what I think about that. Let me give you a brief overview of what we are talking about in terms of the change. And all this is important because when we're going to talk about the rate case, then you will see the concern that we have as a cooperative. This sketch outlines the existing system that serves Barbados so well. We import fuel, we store it through the BNOCL resources. It is provided to BLP for their generation equipment to convert that fuel from chemical to heat and electrical energy, and then is distributed through their grid to customers and used in the various customer premises. What we are seeking to change this to is radically different. We are now looking at a situation where we will be harvesting energy by solar, by wind resources, by biofuel, waste energy, hydrogen, a variety of different on-site local energy sources to make that available to customers. The problem with most of this is that lots of it is intermittent. It is not controllable in the way that BLPC, for example, have been able over the years to control exactly how much fuel they inject into an engine, how fast that engine is going to spin. They could look at the frequency and decide if to speed up or slow down. This is a completely different logical arrangement. And is the grid that is going to manage that is going to be a completely different grid, one that is able to identify when there's too much energy coming from solar and from wind and from biofuels and direct that to storage. And then also identify when there's insufficient immediate resources available and direct resources from the energy storage to the customers. Because I can tell you one thing that we are absolutely sure of. It is not anticipated that Barbadians will accept significantly lower standards of reliability, quality, or general service under the new renewable energy regime. The only thing that Barbadians are looking forward to drop with this change is the price. But people will still want reliable power, just as they've grown accustomed to over the last 100 years, when the sun is shining, when it is not, when it's night, or when it's day. And therefore, the challenge to maintain those standards with this completely different system is not an easy challenge. So this is what we're looking at moving from the top to the bottom situation. And the point I want to suggest to you is that this is not a change that can be morphed. There's no provision to gradually slide from the top situation, the fossil fuel situation, to the renewable energy situation, because they are so fundamentally different. And you have to bear in mind that as it is now, we can barely afford the single system at the top that we've had for 100 years, where everything is in place and paid for. That is extremely expensive. Any idea that we can keep that while building a second parallel system so we can phase over is that has to be given a lot thought. This is the kind of challenge that needs to be addressed. So this is where we're at. In answer to the question, is the Barbados National Energy Policy feasible and doable? I would suggest to you, this is a real policy. It is imaginative, it is bold, but it is also disruptive, and it cannot be done incrementally. This is something that needs to be planned and then changed over. So that in the same way now that we have a situation, we happen to have a situation now where we have, say, a 90%, 95% fossil and just a small token renewable component, there's going to come a time where we're going to have to do a swap and move over to maybe a 70, 80% and a smaller fossil, which we can then gradually then move away. But this whole idea of moving to 10%, 15%, 20%, 30%, 35%, that is not financially, not technically feasible, in my humble opinion. But I'm sure that there's some others who probably think that this can be done. Just from the cost point of view of maintaining or paralleling the two systems itself would be a challenge. So therefore, to us in the cooperative movement, once we discuss these things, we are not surprised at the slow progress. As I said, since this policy was launched in 2019, this is now 2023, we have moved from 5% to maybe 9 or 10%. This is nowhere near to 100%. So why the slow movement? First of all, let me look at our the policy that drives investment in this new changeover that we're talking about. The current investors in the utility, which I'm at pains to point out to you, is the ideal, effective way of doing this successfully. This is what has worked for the last 100 years across the world, and certainly in Barbados. The idea, the current investors are non-local, all foreign, and their focus is not necessarily developmental. It is clearly their bottom line, which is what any investor would be. That's the natural situation. Secondly, there are no opportunities for locals to invest in the utility. That avenue has been closed. Such investments would have allowed locals to share any assets they have towards this development and to benefit from the guaranteed returns that the law provides through the utility. What this leaves is for local investment to have to compete directly with the utility, either as IPPs or by going off-grid to compete for the same customers that currently are served by the utility. Now, some people seem to think that such competition may be good for business. I want to suggest to you the opposite is true. Because of fractured economies of scale, poor technical coordination where people now in competing to beat one another with price, opt for different qualities of equipment, different design methodologies, and you end up with an island with equipment with no set standard. Everybody is doing as they like. So there's poor technical coordination. This leads to wasteful duplication of resources, peers, expertise, training. That is a real challenge, and certainly to conflicting interests, because different people are trying to achieve different ends for their own personal end. Also, it has been shown across the world consistently that energy produced on a utility scale is typically half the cost of energy that's produced by small IPPs and small producers. And that's not difficult to expect, because in the duplication of expertise, for example, I mean, one engineer can run a whole utility or a few engineers, whereas for every installation, you need to have that quality of expertise if you're going to get your plant, if that plant is going to run year after year after year after year at peak operation levels. So our investment strategy is flawed, and it causes a problem. So whereas before we had a situation where you had one entity driving progress, making decisions, coordinating planning and engineering and all that, now you have a whole range of competitive entities trying to reach their own particular ends. In terms of policy, government, first of all, let me say that strategic energy planning is a long-term undertaking. We're talking 25 to 50, sometimes more than 50 years. If you talk about pump storage, for example, or that kind of technology, you are going to be designing a system that you expect to last you 60, 70, 80 years of top quality service. That is the kind of thinking and planning that needs to go into long-term energy development. Governments tend to focus on short-term investment opportunities, just as we were thinking when, for example, we sold the shares of the NIS shares. There were short-term goals that had to be achieved, and we did that. Similar to the feed-in tariffs. Feed-in tariffs are being used to encourage persons to make investments. But the truth is, the cost of investment need to be driven by the technology and by the engineering. And when we see what we're going to do, what we need to do to be successful over the long term, what is going to cost, then the price that we can pay is derived from that, not the other way around. And this has been shown in many examples across the world, but many people tend to be distracted by what happened in Germany. But it's important to remember that Germany did the feed-in tariff arrangement mainly out of concerns for national security, the fact that they could not meet their energy needs and they were prepared to pay to be able to reduce that dependency. But that's a different story. The FTC is responsible for setting rates for all of these competing players. So here's a situation where it's supposed to be a market. You have the IPPs, you have Light and Power, you have everything, but the one agency is setting the rates that Light and Power charge the customers. They set the rates that the investors in Light and Power can pay themselves. They set the rates that the IPPs get paid from Light and Power. And this is supposed to be a market situation. It cannot be. And this obviously creates problems. So if you listen to the persons who have invested their funds to help to address the problem by being independent power producers, you will see that they have many concerns about the price being paid. They're not in a position where they can compete because they cannot set the price. The price has to be set for them. So it is really an artificial market, and it creates uncertainty and difficulty in moving forward. And this is another reason why things have been slow. And then finally, there's the legislation. Our legislation is old. It was well designed for the old fossil environment, maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago. But we now live in a completely different world. And the legislation is out of date. It needs to be changed. The government recognizes that, and for the last 10 years, attempts have been made to change some of the core legislation, particularly the Light and Power Act. But that, as we speak, remains outstanding. That is a serious challenge. And then the final item that I would suggest that retards progress is the public information and education and buy-in. The public in Barbados have been misled into the belief that the government's policy is a very simple policy. You know, we've done this thing, all you have to do is get people to bring money and this thing is going to work great. The truth is, there's evidence all over the world that this is not the case. Spain is probably the best example. Australia went through it. Read anything about South Africa now as we speak, they're going through rolling blackouts. This is an extremely complex undertaking. The truth is, having said that, we can do it in Barbados. Barbados is unique because of size, the history, the kind of resources that we have in terms of wind and sun and all that. If it is doable someplace, it is doable in Barbados. But it is not simple. I cannot say that too often. It is not straightforward. And we cannot treat it as straightforward. We have to recognize it as complex, treat it as complex, and then go ahead to make it work. We can do that. The public was advised at the highest level that significant amounts of additional resources were available on Lightning Power's network. And it's only to hear Lightning Power come in November last year to announce that this is not the case. Changes will have to be made because of instability. This was predictable from the very beginning. We've been saying that for years now. So the whole idea, the whole public education and to get in public buy-in, these things need to be done properly up front so that you don't have these kind of changes that then introduce doubt in the public's mind and slow the process down. The other thing, of course, is that the public was led to believe by BLPC that they were in such dire straits that unless they got an increase in 2021, when they applied for the rate, in a matter of months, they would face a serious cash flow problem and all that. As a result of their concern and their application for a rate hearing, which I'm going to talk about now, this process has effectively been stalled for this is now 16 months where we've been concentrating on a rate hearing rather than taking our critically important national energy planning transformation system forward. So I would suggest to you that the utility model in Barbados, outstandingly successful over the last 100 years or so, have failed in the last 10 years or so. And the evidence is there to show it. Only 4% growth since 2019 in RE. I can tell you, for example, one of the concerns that we've been asking about in the rate hearing is an estimated $1.4 billion in additional fuel charges that were imposed on Barbadians because new efficient equipment promised in the 2010 rate hearing were never installed. This incurred significant fuel charges to Barbadian consumers. There was a self-insurance fund designed by innovative managers back in the 90s to protect this country in the event of a national catastrophe, which has been decapitalized by significant amounts. And we have not been able to get a good explanation as to why this has happened. And during this whole period, shareholders paid themselves over $500 million in dividends as a reward for this kind of performance during this period. So we have been very concerned as the cooperative movement during the rate hearing about what we have been seeing coming out and the kind of answers we've been getting to these questions. So as I said, there was an application in 2021, which we are now going through. When we got a chance to analyze the audited financial records, this is basically a summary of what we found. And basically what we did was to look through the audited financial statements and summarize performance since the last rate hearing in 2010. So that total fuel charges paid by customers for that period, $3.65 billion. Total electricity revenues collected, $2.55 billion. All this from Barbadian consumers. Total investment in the operation by shareholders, not a single cent. Total expenditure in producing electricity and making the system work and paying salaries and all that, $1.9 billion, leaving net income of $635 million over the period, of which $538 million went as dividends, leaving $97 million as retained earnings for the operation of the company. I must tell you, we did not understand this arithmetic, and we still have not been able to understand it. As an intervener, we have therefore been asking numerous questions for more clarity on what appears to be a number of quite unusual arrangements. Now, these are the kind of questions we're asking. Where are the principles mandated in the Act at Section 3? The Act mandates that the FTC set a number of principles to guide the setting of rates. This makes so much sense to us. And we have always said from the beginning that shows those principles, as long as everything is in place, it must be absolutely clear what the rate should be, and we can all move on. Those principles appear not to exist. The other question, how can a company that has paid more than 24% dividends on shares over a 10-year period now turn around and claim financial hardship? Why were new, efficient generating plants not installed after the 2010 hearing as promised when the rates were awarded to do that? And this went on to cost customers what we estimate to be in the region of 1.4 billion in extra fuel charges over the next decade. We had questions about the self-insurance fund. And lastly, when government taxes dropped from 20% to 4% of what it was in 2019, this incurred a tax savings to the company in the region of $18 million. Surely, this would have been part of the rate paid by customers, and you would think that this money would have been, the rates would have been adjusted downwards to transfer this savings from the government to the customers who were paying the rate. Instead, this was paid as dividends to shareholders. We did not understand that, and we still do not understand it. So that 16 months after the application, and in February of 2023, we have not had any coherent answers to these questions. Is that we are concerned that the new rates, even when they do come, will not take us forward in this critical new RE initiative. Far from being a financial strain, we suggest that BLP has paid better dividends since 2010 than probably any other non-oil company in this region. And we were concerned that interim rates could be granted given these circumstances, just on the company's hearsay that they were having a hard time. I'm going to stop at this point. I have a couple of other slides, but I think I'm going to stop at this point and give the participants, if you don't mind, Vincent, a chance to have their say and direct me if I'm on the wrong track or whatever is
I
needed.
welcome questions. Thank you for that. Very insightful.
Hello, sir. Hello. Right. All questions will come through me, and you will be directed when you can ask or answer certain things. So just give us a second, please. Colonel Browne, thank you very much for your interaction, your presentation on what I thought to be very intriguing background as to the problem that we as a small developing nation have at hand. At this stage, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to open the floor to questions. And I'll remind you the process is you will either indicate by raising your hand so that I can call upon you, or you can place your question in the chat and I will call upon you to ask your question, then to permit Colonel Browne to respond. So I would ask you now to indicate who would like to ask questions at this stage so that we can have an interaction. And I emphasize interaction, okay? So the person that is labeled as Don Allen, I believe you wanted to ask a question, sir. You can now unmute and ask your question. Or is that, sorry, Chris Halsall. My apologies. You can go ahead and ask your question, sir.
Thank you. It's Chris Halsall. Sir, I sincerely understand where you're coming from. Absolutely. But a sincere question. Barbados Light and Power have a natural monopoly. Do you agree? Over.
Colonel, you're muted.
Okay, as I explained briefly, the nature of public utilities is such that these organizations are established by government. It's a company organized by government, operated by a franchise, a license, and the holder of that license have an effective monopoly because there's a law that says no one else can sell electricity to the public in Barbados as long as that license is in place. So the answer to your question is yes, the franchise gives the holder of the franchise a monopoly on the sale of electricity to the public.
Please forgive me for this, but that was not the question. My question was, do you understand what a natural monopoly is? Yes or no?
Mr. Halsell, if you have a point that you want to make, go ahead and make it, and I can respond if you want. I told you what I think a natural monopoly is, a utility monopoly is, and that is my answer to that question.
Natural, not national.
Mr. Halsall,
Never
can you
mind.
repeat your question, please?
Never mind. I stand down. Never mind. I stand down. Thank you.
Thank you too. Who else has questions? Let me look in the chat. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are all here this evening to interact, and we are offering you this opportunity to do just that. Do not leave this session tonight and go away grunting and moaning as Bajans usually do, having not had a genuine opportunity to interact and discuss these matters in a very candid and open way. Mr. Norgrove, you can open and answer your question, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Didi, this 100 million that was supposed to be for catastrophes and insurance that was transferred out, you said illegally. Shouldn't it be possible then that we can force the company to return those funds? If it was illegal and they've broken a law, should we be able to reverse that situation?
Okay, thanks for that question, David. Obviously, if a matter is illegal, this thing that would have to be determined by a court in the final analysis. What has happened is that during the hearing and during our analysis of the records, we could not understand a fairly significant transfer. And when we asked about it, what we were told is that this self-insurance fund, and I could explain what that is, back in the 90s, when right after Hurricane Andrew in Florida, the older people among us will remember that, there was significant difficulties in this region to get reinsurance. And the company also underwent those difficulties. But Lightning Power came up with an innovative solution by creating a self-insurance fund. And luckily for us, for the company and for the country, a number of years passed before any major impacts, and this fund was able to build up to the level where it could then become an effective insurance fund. So that in 1998, it was established formally under trust as a self-insurance fund. Essentially, this is a set of funds invested overseas in US dollars that are held in place of what you would normally pay for insurance. So rather than pay, say, $5 million insurance every year, you would make a deposit to the fund. And the intent was that if there was ever a major catastrophe, the company has, and the country has immediate access to funds to begin restoration, to buy replacement equipment, to do what needs to be done to get back online. What happened was that in 2016, a decision seemed to have been taken to revalue this fund downwards and to transfer the funds as dividends. We pointed out that even a casual look at the regulations would indicate that this was not allowed. The regulations clearly said that those funds, as you would expect for a trust, can only be used for reinstatement of a catastrophe situation in Barbados. But you would notice that the Fair Trading Commission in their decision just a few days ago indicated that this situation needs to be reversed. I'm not absolutely clear on the process that they've outlined for addressing the situation, but they did acknowledge that it was not it cannot continue and it has to be sorted out. So I guess we will hear more on exactly how it is supposed to be sorted out.
Thank you very much. Any follow-up on your question, sir, or do we move on to another?
No, that was good. Thank you very much, DT. That was...
Okay, David, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norgrove. Engineer Williams? You can open and ask your question, sir. Engineer Williams, you can open and ask your question, sir. All right, we will come back to Engineer Williams. Engineer Phillips, you can open and ask your question, sir.
Yes. I'm concerned that across Barbados, we see these leaning light and power poles. And we can see what happened in the other countries after they've hit with major disaster. Some of these poles snap and some fall. I'm trying to find out why we are not strengthening them. Is there something, is there some reason why we're just not strengthening our utility poles?
Okay, to answer that question, Grenville, I'll give you a general statement. The way that resources are used by a utility depends on the priorities that they set. For many years, I spent a lot of time at Light and Power, and I can tell you that there was no question that the number one priority for the company in those years was what we call meeting customer requirements. And in fact, there were proactive technologies in place and personnel to find leaning and rotten poles and tree problems, for example, and the intent was to find them before the customers actually even realized it was a problem. But that was because of the kind of priority set at that time. Obviously, if you change the decision makers, and the philosophy that they bring tends to influence the investment policy and the way that they respond to all things. So the whole question of staffing, training, the priorities, now you notice that the priority is on safety. Everything changes and is driven by the policy that comes from the board level. So that's the only way I can answer that question, because obviously one of the requirements of the person who holds the franchise, who government issues that franchise to, the first requirement is to maintain the Barbados electrical infrastructure in the best possible shape. The second one is to upgrade that infrastructure to be as modern as is necessary to meet the requirements of the country. And given the policy set by government, it is clear that that requirement is to move us towards renewable energy, the Barbados National Energy Policy. So therefore, under the franchise, there is a commitment to move the electrical infrastructure towards a renewable energy environment. But ultimately, how funds are allocated for maintenance, replacement of poles, dealing with leaning poles and things like that is driven by the overall philosophy of the leadership.
Right.
Engineer.
May I come in now? I was having some difficulty getting my mic switched on.
Sure, just stand by, Engineer Williams. Engineer Phillips, are you finished with your engagement?
Yes, I'm just trying to find out then. Distribution is very important. Distribution to customers. You're distributing electricity through wires that are connected, well, that are stabilized with poles. Why, I just can't understand why the distribution aspect is so vulnerable. It's working, yes, it's working. We are getting electricity, but it's vulnerable. And we can see what happened in the other countries when these things are not paid attention to, is that we are planning to fail. That's my concern. We are just planning to fail when it's so avoidable.
No, but
That's my only concern.
In all fairness, Grenville, though, it is a complex situation where you have to balance the costs. So, I mean, for example, everybody would like, if we can go underground because we live in a hurricane belt. But if you understand the cost involved, there has to be some kind of compromise between absolute strengthening and taking a certain level of risk and having insurance to cover it. And,
yep.
and basically, the company will have to take a bet on how much do I spend to harden my overhead, like my distribution system, as opposed to in certain resources in other areas that are needed. So it is, in all honesty, it is not a simple, straightforward question. That's saying that probably needs to sit down around a table and argue a lot and fight about and all that. It's not
Right.
It's not a cut and dry answer.
But things, I'm not talking about a strengthening to a certain level of hurricane. I'm talking about poles that are leaning like 7, 8, 15 degrees, just leaning. They're just like, they're ready to go. That's my concern. Right? Is that it's not being maintained at all. I'm not talking about strengthening is one thing. Strengthening, you take a bet, I accept that. But I can't understand why they're leaning so much. That's my concern.
Okay, Dr.
If I
Phillips,
may, have you
Thank you.
ever actually climbed a tower? Have you actually ever placed a pole? It's not trivial. I would really love to hear from Ralph Williams. Is that possible?
Okay, Mr. Halsall, I will moderate this session, and I will just ask you to sit tight, and you will get to hear from Engineer Williams, along with everybody else that's asked some questions. So please stand by, sir. So,
Understood. Thank you.
thank you very
Forgive
much,
me.
Dr. Phillips, for your interaction. Engineer Williams, we can now come back to you. Now you've got your technical issues sorted out, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. First thing I would like to thank Engineer Fellow Browne for doing the research and presenting a very clear case for us to assimilate. But what you said, Colonel Browne, is that the Light and Power has produced a reliable service to Barbados for over 100 years, or about 100 years. Why then was it so difficult for the government to extend their contract? And isn't that the elephant in the room here? Without security of tenure, could they really have invested in the more efficient equipment to reduce the fuel consumption? My question is, what was the motive for not extending the company's contract? Let me go further and make a few comments. I remember when I was a young man, I was very friendly with Mr. Gordon Butcher, who used to build a lot of the buses that are now traveling the roads in Barbados, the yellow buses. Mr. Butcher went out of business because the government refused to give him a long-term contract to say deliver 2 buses every month. They insisted on letting lots of time pass and then give him a order for 100 buses, which he couldn't produce. So these are things that you have to, in business, you have to have tenure of some sort of security of tenure before you start investing big money to produce electricity for the country. If the country shows no love for you, you're not likely to show love for the country. That's my view.
Okay, so would you like a response now?
Yes, anytime.
Okay, thank you for that. That's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked that because I really wanted to talk a little bit about that. First, you asked why did the government the government extended the contract so far? I was at pains to explain. This is why I started my presentation by talking about the Barbados National Energy Policy, the overall challenge faced by this country, and the path that the government is taking to address that problem. So that we are at a stage now where government has set a clear policy to move Barbados from where we are now in fossil fuel to a sustainable future by 2030. I explained why that is critically important. I explained that under normal circumstances, it is the utility, the government haven't set that policy, it is the utility that should take that policy and run with it. What has happened since government set that policy in 2019 is particularly interesting. So in 2019, government actually issued a written policy saying this is where we want to take Barbados with energy. Have you noticed that in that period, Light and Power built another fossil fuel plant? You noticed that?
Where? In St. Lucie?
Yes.
That was the bridge. Didn't the government of
I
Barbados
don't care what you
demand
call
that
it.
they build it?
Listen, you can call it whatever you want. It is a fossil fuel plant. The kind of
True,
things we want,
but-
the government has set a
but-
policy.
but-
But you want me to
but-
answer, or you don't want me to answer the question? Because
No, I just want to have my little say too, because as far as I remember,
I thought you wanted
No,
to answer to that first.
as
Okay.
far as I remember, the government of Barbados insisted that the Light and Power build that plant.
So can I answer now then?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And if you were to go on the FTC site and read the rate decision for 2010, in 2010, the company approached the FTC and said, we have some old steam generating equipment at Spring Garden that has way past its use by date. It needs to be changed because it's inefficient. In order to change that, we're going to need an increase in rates. They got the increase in rates. Nothing has happened. Obviously, government has all along been saying, well, where's the new plant to replace this inefficient plant? If that's what you mean by 10 years later, when everything has changed, and when in 2019 now we are now moving to renewable energy, that clean energy plant was due in 2010. And had it been built in 2010, Barbadians would have paid, we estimated, something like $1.4 billion less in fuel charges. If you were the government, would you not be concerned? The government, this has been the busy. Also, the government has a responsibility for the overall success of this country. And to the extent, just because, so for example, and let me, somebody had the question in the chat as to when the franchise runs out. It runs out in 2028. I think it was like a 40-year franchise. It happens to run out in 2028. But the truth is, at some point, it's going to run out. And this argument that unless you have an almost infinite franchise, you can't enter contracts is a joke. When a person enters a contract with the utility, it is with that whoever holds the franchise takes responsibility for that contract going forward. It is not an excuse to say, well, I'm only here till 2028, so I'm not doing anything beyond 2029. That's immature and irresponsible. And government has a responsibility to think beyond that level, and they did. It would have been irresponsible of the government to just run just because somebody said, we have a concern and give them whatever they wanted. I must tell you, when it comes to the Barbados National Energy Policy, the Barbados government has to be congratulated for a globally innovative and creative policy that is actually doable. What it needs is to have the players on board with what government wants. And if you are suggesting that the way to do that is to give people who would, for example, take $100 million out of a self-insurance fund for some arbitrary reason, free license to do whatever they want, you will have disagreement from me, Engineer Williams. And you will have, and my support would always be for the government for the fact that they took their time and thought about it. The license was in 2028, this is 2023.
Colonel Browne, may I have a little say now?
Of a long one if you want.
All right. When the Light and Power was given an additional rate, I presume that we're given that rate so they could amortize the cost of installing new plant over a period of probably 20, 30 years.
That's how it works.
Right, okay. But when they were also not given the 30 years in which to amortize it, then how would they be able to borrow the money or finance the thing when they can't amortize it because they don't have the time to amortize it? They don't know that when the day comes in 2028, the axe might fall and they will not have then amortized the plant yet. So
that sounds good.
You know,
but before you go any further, let me point out something to you, because I heard that argument during the hearing too, right? If you look at our financial analysis, we looked at every single cent that has been invested in Light and Power in the last 30 years has come from the pockets of Barbadian ratepayers. Not a single cent has come from any other investor anywhere. You want me to say that again, or is that clear?
No, I think it's
this idea that we're not. So this
and
idea
it's how business runs. It is accurate, and it is how business runs.
From our perspective as a cooperative representing thousands of ordinary Barbadians who want to invest, That may be how business runs. But we have to be concerned about how we invest our clients' monies. If it's going to be an environment where people can do as they like, and you can tell me that this is how business runs.
But they're not doing as they like. They're a controlled utility.
By
They
who?
have to comply with the rulings of the FTC. So it's a controlled utility.
It is supposed to be, you're right. Yeah, you're right. It is supposed to be. Which is why we are concerned about the $100 million withdrawal, which is why we are concerned about the excessive dividends being paid and then asking for increasing rates because you are cash strapped.
I am not sure of my facts, right?
Oh no, but I am,
have been
because I sat
told
there and I have access to
you
the
have
actual
covered,
information.
you've studied the thing, right?
That's
But
right.
I have been told that the Light and Power says that it's now down to 4% return on its capital investment. Is that correct?
It may be correct that they say that, but
But do the facts, do the results and the financial statements that you studied show that?
no,
What is the return now on their capital investment?
let's start by talking about what their capital investment is. When you say their capital investment, what are you talking about?
All the plant, the wires, the cables, the thin leaning poles that engineer Phillips is talking about.
That you mean that I just went to great length to point out to you was funded 100% by Barbadian ratepayers over the last 3 decades.
Engineer Browne,
Investors ownership in Light and Power is
chart?
the investors have ownership in the company of $100 million in shares. That $100 million was there for eons. When the current shareholders bought the company, they did not put a cent in the company. They actually paid the money to the existing holders of those shares and transferred ownership of the shares to themselves. Subsequently, they have not invested a single cent. So all this talk about creating conditions so that we can get more investors and all that applies in North America, where there is a market, where people can go and buy shares, and where you have to create an environment where it pays me to go and buy some shares because I'm going to get a return. If all the investment is going to come from customers, how is this? How does it the people who were going to pay for the plant that was supposed to install in 2010 is the customers, and they paid. The rates went up. So over the years, they actually paid. It's just that no plant was built, Ralph.
Yeah. Well,
no, but if you were a government, you understand that you would have to be concerned, and it would be irresponsible of government. It would have been if they had just rushed, because you could imagine what a man like me with my big mouth would have been saying now about government if they had done that.
I can
it would make
imagine.
capitalists and pepper. If they had done that, it would be the other way around. I would be cursing them left, right, and center. I have to say that government has built a first-class policy. What is missing is implementation. And implementation is meant to be the responsibility of the utility. Across the world, that's how it works. It has not worked this way in Barbados since the ownership of our utility moved from being public with people, anybody going to buy shares and the NIS having shares and all that, to a situation where the shares are all held by a single entity whose focus is bottom line. That is reality. And whether they can say or not, this is the government's reality and why they cannot rush and make harsh decisions.
Right. But Colonel Browne, I have the greatest respect for you. That's the truth. But look, when Barbadians were given the opportunity to sell their shares, they sold them. Why did they sell them?
Barbadians, I did not have any opportunity. You had to sell. Once the NIS sold the shares, you were forced to sell.
Why did the NIS sell the shares?
Well, that is a question that we have been asking of the FTC, especially in light of the fact that when Sol wanted to do a similar thing, the FTC denied Sol from doing that because they said it created issues with monopoly situation. Recently, just a couple of weeks ago, BICO wanted to do the same thing. And
yes, I'm aware of it.
FTC said that BICO cannot do it. But somehow, when Light and Power wanted to do it and make ordinary Barbadians, including employees, have to sell their shares to a foreign owner, FTC didn't have any problem with that, and that was allowed to go through. I have serious concerns about that. Serious.
Well, I'm glad that I brought it up, and that it shows that sometimes Barbadians are very short-sighted in their long-term investment policy.
Basically, as I told you when you did your presentation last week or last month, you're a man after my own heart. You know that.
Well, and I have the greatest respect for you, as I said already. But at the same time, the Light and Power felt that, in my opinion, I have no personal knowledge of what goes on there, but the Light and Power felt that they were being treated pretty shabby. They'd given a good service to Barbados, and then they were denied some. I would have tried to negotiate a better long-term contract with them rather than not give them a contract at all.
But don't you think that the government have been trained actively to negotiate a good long-term contract? That is,
I hope so. I hope so.
But I hope you understand too that government's interest has to be much broader than Emira's can be.
Of
Government
course.
has to be concerned about what big mouth people like Trevor Browne and BAP is going to say.
Yeah.
They have to be concerned about what Bar is going to say. So they cannot just willingly do something because it sounds good to Emira. The government is in a very, very difficult position. And the truth is, I would like you to consider that maybe these people who have benefited from this contract and who have been able to pay themselves over $500 million in dividends over the last decade, owe it to the government of Barbados to come on board with them and to make sure that the government's brilliant national energy policy is successful. Because if that is actually going to put Barbados in a place globally that everybody else in the world will envy.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to sign off. Not I'm going to stop listening, but I'm going to stop speaking because I believe that there are other engineers who would like to get on. And I'd like to hear what everybody wants to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
your intervention. All the best.
Mr. Williams, thank you very much. Okay, we have several questions. We're going to go first to, we're just going to peep here in the chat, and then we're going to come back to the live questions. So let me go to Joseph Jones, who says, regarding the SIF, has the co-op engaged an attorney to carry out this issue to the Financial Services Commission, the body responsible for oversight of insurance activities? After all, Barbados Light and Power's lawyer forced the fact that FTC does not regulate insurance down the panel's throat during the hearing. Colonel Browne?
Well, that's a very interesting question. When I personally raised this question during the hearing, Light and Power produced evidence that not only did they write to the FTC prior to doing this withdrawal, but they also contacted the Financial Services Commission and the Central Bank. So all of these agencies would have been intimately aware of this transaction on the self-insurance fund. And yet it was allowed to go through. Perhaps they may need to explain why. In answer to the question about whether the co-op has engaged a lawyer, not yet. There is a process in place. The process is called a rate hearing. And during the rate hearing, what we found was that when we attempted to raise these questions during the actual hearing, it was very difficult because the hearing is not configured. Basically, every time you try to say something, you're told you can't say anything, you have to ask questions. And obviously, if I ask you a question that you don't want to answer, you can tell me whatever you want. Fortunately, this process allows for written intervention. So we submitted formal legal motions to the FTC outlining the absolute specifics of our concerns in absolute legal format. Now, according to the Utility Regulation Act, the Fair Trading Commission is bound to call a hearing, to hear our concerns, to hear the evidence, and to make a decision. This is over 3 months, and we have not heard anything from them, despite reminders to them that it is outstanding. Once they have this hearing and they make their decision, it is at that point that the cooperative coalition will be in position to take further steps, such as take legal action or do what we need to do. let me explain that. The reason why the cooperative movement in Barbados is interested in this is because most of you all may know that the co-ops have grown phenomenally in Barbados. Right now, the cooperative movement collectively, you're talking about $3 billion in assets. You're talking about over 200,000 registered members across the movement. The collective movement is interested in solid long-term investments, and energy is particularly attractive. When the Ministry of Energy was advertising and trying to promote the new national energy policy, the cooperatives and BAP were invited to the stakeholder sessions and became very involved in the process and very interested in the process. So the cooperative movement is interested. It is a solid investment. It is an investment in your own future, in your own country. But obviously, the movement is not, we can't really, a couple of weeks ago, one of our credit unions had an issue where they submitted a report late. And this became a national issue, a report late. Most government agencies don't submit reports at all. And that's not the issue. Can you imagine if we have a major failure in the movement? We have to be particularly careful about our investments. And that is what we have been doing. We've been asking questions. We just expect reasonable, logical answers so that when I do this presentation to one of my cooperatives or to a credit union, and they ask me these questions, I can answer in a way that is honest, upfront, and coherent. And I can only do that if I get answers. So when they ask the question and I don't get answers, it puts me in a very difficult position. So we're not trying to be difficult. We are actually trying to put things in place so that the cooperative movement can, on behalf of Barbadians, in keeping with the Barbados national policy, invest in the energy future of this country.
Colonel Browne, I'm interested by some statements that were carried in the press, where it said that the hearing commissioner, Dr. Donnelly Carrington, had indicated that Barbados Light and Power Corporation was further ordered to refund to the customers the SIF amounts withdrawn that are not redeposited into the SIF over a 30-year amortization period as a reduction to insurance expense that shall be shown as a separately identifiable amount. Does that then mean that the FTC will be taking legal action in that regard?
As far as we're concerned, all that means is that a lawyer wrote that.
Very well, sir.
I have to tell you the honest truth, right? That question has been raised to me by the press before. And I have no idea whatsoever what it means. And I have every expectation that the chairman will actually expand further and probably explain it in layman's terms. He has a way of doing that quite well. And I'm pretty sure he was probably reading something that some lawyer wrote, which is meant to not mean anything. So I really have no idea what it says. That's the honest truth.
Thank you for that comment, sir. All right, I would invite Mr. David Strong to ask your question, please, sir. David, you can unmute.
Yes, thank you, Vincent. And thank you, Trevor, for taking all those points and weaving this wonderful tapestry so we can actually follow point by point what has happened and where we stand. Thank you very much. It was masterfully done. In fairness to the present administration, to the government, let me just say this, in fairness to the government, I just want to revisit what Colonel Browne spoke about earlier in response to Engineer Williams's point about the quote unquote energy bridge in the north in Trent, and the fact that the BLPC has set up a fossil fuel plant immediately after the stated policy of the government to go to net zero by 2030. But understand that this was in response, the government, in fairness to them, was response to, remember I think it was the 2019 rolling blackouts and load shedding, that's something that Barbados has never experienced in their life before, brought about in no small measure by a lack of or non-existent maintenance program from the Barbados Light and Power, brought about by the fact that Light and Power did not replace the aging plant that was funded by the FTC rate some years before. And then the BNOC, in my view, being targeted as a whipping boy, erroneously, in my view, as bringing in bad fuel. But then the government, I remember hearing this, insisted that while we know we have to set up a plant so that this would never ever happen again to us, especially on the eve of the tourism season, Never happened to Barbados where restaurants would be shutting down and all sorts of things. That they were a promise, a tacit undertaking that even though we cannot, like, in this short space of time, set up a 35 or so megawatt plant to take some of that load, and nobody on the Earth or Mars could set up a renewable energy plant of that magnitude in such a short space of time, that there was an undertaking that this would eventually become something of a clean energy bridge, whereby those machines, those prime movers, those massive diesels can be converted into using natural gas. My question is that true? Can that actually become a clean energy bridge? I'll leave it right there.
Thank you, David. Colonel?
Yes, technically it can. And David is generally right. Government was actually between a rock and a hard place. It's very difficult. These are very complex issues. And the problem is, to a large extent, government depends on the utility to provide guidance and advice. And naturally so, because the issues are exceedingly complex. Even the issue that Grenville raised about a simple thing like maintaining poles. How you balance what you do and against what it costs and what the risks are is highly complicated. We spent many, many years around tables arguing and fighting at Lightning Power to make decisions like that because they're complex. So he's right. Government was, and that's why they would have supported this thing to say, well, at least we're not going to have that embarrassing. That's happening in South Africa as we speak. The people who are getting electricity only 4 hours a day in South Africa, probably the benefits of all the African states, and because of poor planning. So that I support what Mr. Strong just said.
Okay, thank you, Colonel. Question here from, sorry, my screen is wrapped. Sandra Seeley. And the question says, with reference to the table which shown the actual and targeted RE penetration, could you clarify if this is only with reference to the generation of electricity from RE?
This is the table that compared the top 10 ambitious countries.
Sandra, you're in a position to reply in the chat.
Yes, it is.
Oh, right. So basically, at the national policy level, countries have set targets for how they want to, and this is coming out of the starting with the Paris agreements and these annual COP meetings that they have. Countries have set and publicly, not globally, publish what their targets are in terms of meeting these COP goals that have been set. So this would have come from that. So you have many of those countries in the top talking about 100% are countries that are already 60, 70, 80, in some cases already 100%. And I pull those out to show the difference between those kind of countries that have lots of hydro and thermal energy and all that, compared to Barbados, who is actually taking a completely different approach that, if successful, will be a groundbreaker for this world and become a model, especially for small states like Barbados, small tropical states. So there's a lot of potential. And from a technical point of view, our argument is that it actually can work, but it will only work if everybody comes on board in a way that we put our heads together, our resources together, our act together, and make it work like the way we used to work before when Lightning Power was actually owned by Barbadians. That is actually the truth of the real bottom line of the argument. And I don't have any problem with saying that because that's obviously the actual case.
Right.
Okay.
So it's only, so it's, from what you're saying, it's only with respect to, right, the energy that is used to generate electricity comes from renewable sources. And we're not talking anything about transport or anything like that, are we?
No, well, it includes transport. It is the move from fossil. So, for example, in places like Denmark, for example,
Okay.
Right, it definitely includes transforming the transport fleet to electric.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Sandra. All right, we'll take a question now from Glenn. David, can you lower your hand unless you have another question? Thanks. Glenn Husbands, you can answer your question, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Colonel Browne. It was very, very interesting discussion, very informative. I have a kind of tangential question, and it kind of touches on the distribution system, which in future will not only be distribution, but will also be the means by which the energy is fed back into the grid. So it becomes even more important then. and the insurance. My understanding from what you've said is that Light and Power's monopoly is on the sale of electricity, and that anybody can generate electricity. In the past, that is. But because they had the monopoly on the sale, they had a de facto monopoly on generation in the past. That's my understanding. Going forward, is that a kind of—
It's a little bit more complicated than that. And legally, if you use the word monopoly, the lawyers will complain, because technically they had the only license that was issued. Let me put it that way. But government could, the way the law is written, government could actually have issued and could still issue a license to another generator or to another supplier. The way the law is written, it is only a monopoly because they hold the only license. And the license is for the sale of electricity, so that you can produce your own electricity if you're going to use it for yourself, but you cannot produce electricity to be used by somebody else, even for free, to be quite honest. So, okay. So the rights that they have, the monopoly that they have, is a monopoly on the sale of electricity to the public.
Okay, okay, thanks for that clarification. Well, what I wanted to go on to was that as part of that, and the fact that they are regulated public utility, there were certain constraints on the on the reliability of the supply of electricity in Barbados, and that basically fell on Light and Power.
That's right.
As we move out of that situation where we have external generation, where or what is there a similar regime that is imposed on the other generators to ensure reliability of generating capacity then? How is that going to be handled? For instance, if after a natural disaster, Light and Power is required to restore, or should be required to restore, the supply of electricity to the island. Going forward, where we have other generators of electricity, is there a mechanism that will be put in place that they must also restore their generating capacity in X time if the island is dependent on that?
That's such an excellent question that it isn't funny. And it is one of the major challenges with this new dispensation that is being contemplated with multiple licenses. The whole question of who assumes ultimate responsibility when there's a problem. So when the whole system collapses, who is going to be held responsible for the losses? Who is going to be held responsible for the standards of service that to come back on, and the time frames and all that? Excellent question. And I can tell you, right, from my understanding, there is not yet a definitive answer, which is one of the reasons why anytime anybody asks me, the solution to this problem is to solve that utility model, get it back to what it needs to be, and make that work. This idea of multiple entities, IPPs and this boy, you get these people come along and come up with a brilliant proposal to build a generating plant for 10, 15, 20 megawatt. And then when the person behind that gets sick or die or go overseas or get fed up, it's left in the hands of somebody who don't know what they're doing, who don't really care. And who's going to pay the price in the end? The customers through poor service, or then the same utility having to take it over at great expense and convert the whole thing into something sense. But the truth is, globally, it is the utility model that works. This competitive things with IPPs, a lot of not, this may work in big countries where an IPP is many, many times bigger than Barbados or Barbados Light and Power. But these little mini operations coming up and saying that the IP, they put some pounds on the roof and you are IPP. Your question actually explains the weakness of that approach.
Sorry, thank you very much. Also, just finally, what also concerns me is the fact that a lot of these other places are not in the middle of an ocean separated, so they have capacity.
You obviously know all the difficult questions.
No, I mean, because I mean, if you talk about Norway or any country in Europe, their grid is interconnected with other countries' grids.
That's right.
So,
Same thing with Australia and South Africa. Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, completely different ball game. So that if in the middle of our transformation, like happened in Spain, for example, the system collapsed, all Spain had to do was go to the interconnections, get their power from Italy, France, Germany, pay a little extra for it, and give themselves a chance to get them back on there. What will happen to us is that we will be dark.
Philip, Chad, could you please mute your? Thank you.
thanks very much.
Thank you for those very, very, very probing and enlightening questions.
Thank you, Glenn, for those questions. We will now take a question from Mr. Peter Thompson.
Thank you very much, Colonel Browne. You mentioned that the public understanding of the complexity and challenges of achieving the 2030 goal was one of the reasons that we are not moving toward that goal better.
Can you hold a minute, please? Chad, can you please mute your mic? You're getting some feedback from you, sir. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Thompson, carry on.
So I have been appalled by the quality of journalism throughout the hearing process about the questions involved both in the rate hearing and the wider question of renewable energy transformation. What is your opinion of ways to improve public understanding of what we're trying to achieve here?
Excellent question. And this is one of the major challenges that we actually had. And there's a simple reason for it. The truth is, first of all, the issues are exceedingly complex, with the possible exception of some of the people at Light and Power, for example, who actually do this as a living, and a few other people in Barbados who actually may understand the engineering and some of the complexities. These are really complex issues, not beyond understanding, but they need to be explained in a way that people can understand, and people must be given a chance to ask questions and given honest responses that actually help them to see the challenges that we face. Now, sessions like this, for example, we believe will do that. And actually, the mandate of the Cooperative Coalition is for myself and Holly Haynes, who are the two interveners, the representatives, to now go to the various sectors of the cooperative movement and get them to actually understand the issues that are being faced by government, for example, by the same Light and Power, by Emira. I mean, the stakeholders all have issues that need to be addressed. And the problem with the press, as I think you probably realize, is that they don't actually understand the issues. The truth is the kind of representatives that they had, it was very clear that most of it was actually above their head. And it is difficult to blame them for that unless someone is willing to sit down and explain. And obviously, if I try to do it, they will say, well, he's obviously biased, he's against the company, or he's against the government, or something like that. If Light and Power try to do it, they will say, well, obviously they're trying to get their own in. So basically you have a situation where the people who may understand it appear to be biased. What we need is sessions like this, where there's no reason why somebody from Light and Power can come here now and challenge anything that I say, for example, and we can all discuss it. And this is the kind of environment where we have enough people who understand the engineering basics here that could analyze what it said and what the positions that are taken and come to their own conclusion and maybe then advise the public and the press and all that. So it is these kind of discussions that will actually solve that problem. And the point I was making in outlining the weaknesses is that unless we solve that problem and the public get an understanding that this is actually a brilliant thing that the government has set up for Barbados in terms of the policy, but it is extremely complicated and it needs to be treated as though we were building a complex building in Bridgetown. First thing we would do is go and find some of the best architects available and get them to configure a design that is guaranteed to work. They will look and see what everything is supposed to do, how it is going to work, how it's going to look, the kind of aesthetics, what tourists will see when they come in. And before we put a panel up anywhere in Barbados, they will come up with a design saying, this will be a beautiful design. Then they will hand it over to a bunch of engineers who will say, look at the structural integrity, the design, the way it is going to work, and say, this will last for 50 years if you do this and that. And then you will hand the whole thing over to project managers who will follow the design and the engineering structural designs and make and do an implementation that will actually work And the financing people will have all the details they need to make it work, and the legal people can then put the laws in place to make it, to sustain it. That is how we would do a complex project. Somehow with this one, we think that you can just go get people to bring money, and somehow it's going to magically work. That question of public education is critical. And I think that it is a major weakness, but it will only be addressed if we have sessions like this rather than people trying to hide. But what we have actually found, and I'll be very honest with this, is that when we have come out and asked questions, rather than get answers that I am sure in some cases can be provided by either Lightning Power or the Fair Trading Commission or by other agencies, what they tend to do is to behave as though I'm being difficult. Well, I've been difficult my whole life, so that really is not a problem for me. But the truth is, it is an opportunity to discuss these things and to bring the public on board. Even if you're wrong, you admit it, you agree with what you need to do, and we move forward. The public respect things like that. And then we can have everybody on board and support to make the thing work. What you don't want is situations where you have a senior minister running around saying, "Oh, man, we have megawatts of capacity, go and build some panels." And then the next week, like Nepal issues a letter that says, if you are going to connect to this, this is what you're going to have to do because we ain't taking no more connections. So then the public says, "But hold a minute, what is going on?" So then when you even come with sensible proposals, the public is understandably skeptical because there are people who have committed significant investment based on one story, only to hear a different story now coming from the lion's mouth. We cannot afford that if we're going to be successful.
I understand that. So I do not, scanning the list of 44 participants here, recognize any journalists, unfortunately.
Mr. Thompson, I will say that we did extend invitation to actually senior persons at CBC. And we do try to put it out there in the general forum for persons to participate. And I want to add to what you said, because where the press locally will go to individuals for political analysis, it seems void that they will come to professionals in other areas for analysis of other things. So I think the way the press does things need to come in line with what's done internationally, where you will have professionals within certain areas that do speak on topics on behalf of the press. And I do support you in that they need to up their game.
Well, I mean, this is being recorded, and therefore it would be remiss of the Association of Professional Engineers not to send it to Ms. Martindale as editor-in-chief of the nation.
But with all due respect, Mr. Thompson, if you have individuals watching the content that doesn't understand it, they can't report on it.
We need some way of raising their understanding. And I did not find Mr. Browne's analysis at all difficult to comprehend.
Not at all. It was very clear. And if I may please support Mr. Thompson and Sergeant Browne, any graduate student should be able to understand this. I'm now going to stand down.
Thank you very much.
Chris, I'm often demoted to lieutenant, but sergeant is I mean, sergeant is really
Okay, stopping, standing down. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson, you're finished with your interaction. Can I go on?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Worm, you're up next, sir.
Thank you very much, Vincent, and thank you, Trevor. I do apologize for coming on late. I missed a lot of your presentation, but I've watched with a lot of interest the discussion and the questions that were brought up. And I think this is an excellent forum really to share information. And one disappointment I have, and you mentioned it, Trevor, that it would have been very helpful if Light and Power was actually here to respond to some of the issues, because Trevor and I spent several weeks at the rate case hearing a lot of these issues, and it's very difficult to put them in context for everybody to understand the full context of what is being discussed, because Trevor and I were there, and we still have different views on it. But the point he made is that it really is very important to discuss it, because it's not
the reality is that we all have a vested interest in making this whole new energy policy work if Barbados is going to really be competitive in the future. And my disappointment is not, I mean, Trevor made a point, and I just wanted to clarify it. He said that the government has set a national policy and is now up to Light and Power to really implement it. And in all of what I have been involved in, which is quite significant in different points in time, and you know, I used to be part of Light and Power, as Trevor was many years ago, but I left there since 2015. And I believe that, you know, we know certain things behind the scenes. We know that, and even when I was there and we discussed it a lot at the rate case, that Light and Power was expected to change the steam plant back in 2013, but the government at that time refused to allow them to invest in any fossil fuel plant. That was discussed at the rate case, but it was a view of some of the interveners that they should not already have listened to government, that they should have gone ahead and invested anyhow, but recognizing there is a regulator and they need approval of certain things to move forward. But that said, the whole development of the national energy policy was really to make the energy sector competitive. And as a result, like in my view, where we failed, if there's anywhere, we've done a lot of good things, I think, but I think we've failed in several areas. And one of them is that we have not been listened enough to each other. And Trevor highlighted it, is that, you know, there are a lot of people that have views, and unless we discuss it together, we will not find what the best route is. Because I may have a very strong view on something, and when I hear Trevor speak, and I know he does a lot of research, I always learn. And I benefit from that discussion. And I think we can all benefit when we hear different perspectives. And I think that has been missing a lot through the whole process. And this is what, you know, when I came on to hear what was being said, and a lot of good things, good points have been made. My concern is that some of the things that may not have been quite accurate may leave people here with a certain view that Light and Power is the bad guy in the whole process. They're not always a good guy, but they are, in my view, and then Trevor has highlighted it, that they play a very important role. And we just need to make sure that it is coordinated and done, and everything coordinated in a certain way that will benefit the country. And I am involved with BRIA, so I have been trying to pull, or should I say BRIA has been trying to pull together a lot of the different issues and trying to get everyone from the government, FTC, and Light and Power side to talk a lot more with each other. Another clarification I just wanted to make was on the Clean Energy Bridge. The Clean Energy Bridge is, as Trevor pointed out, is probably about nearly 10 years, at least 9 years late. Because had that been installed back in 2013, we would have saved tremendous amount of money. I don't personally blame Light and Power for it, because I know what went on at the time and what conditions they're working against. I know what the licenses have, that new licenses that have been negotiated or were not yet finalized, but were being negotiated. I'm aware of some of the issues in there. And all of it is really for government to remove the monopoly from a generation side into and let them play a role mainly in the T&D side. The problem that I see there is that they've decided in that process to leave Light and Power out of many of the things. And as Trevor said, mechanism or methodology that's worked for Barbados all these years has been ignored in some aspects of this new energy policy. So I'm saying that we need to pull back a little bit and try to see how we can get people talking together. And this is where I think forums like this, they're great opportunities. But I just wanted to mention on the Clean Energy Bridge, because I've said a lot but already, but the Clean Energy Bridge really was because I don't know if any of you know, Trevor's highlighted it, that we are already at a stage where if we add too much more renewable energy, the system will fail without some level of mitigation, which mainly will be energy storage. And we needed, and we were at the stage where the steam plant was really either had to be a further substantial investments needed to be made in that plant, or we had to get new plant. And I think the right decision was made that we had this bridge, which is a fossil fuel plant, which is now bridging us from where we are today into a renewable energy future. It is not a design that can, as Trevor said, potentially be converted to natural gas, but I do not think it will have that lifespan, because I do believe that it's going to be needed in its current form for an extended period of time for us really to have a stable functioning grid way beyond 2030. But as I say, these are just opinions. I think the important thing is for us to understand that what we are hearing here may be my view, maybe Trevor's view or someone else's view, but we have to, I think the key thing is that we get the necessary parties together and we thrash out some of these issues so that we can find the right path, because there's no doubt in my mind, all I've seen and heard from Trevor is that he has the best interests of Barbados at heart. I know that I have the best interests of Barbados at heart. I believe strongly the government does. I think what we need to do is to bring those hearts together and let us make sure that we continue to do the right thing. So we have done a lot of good things, but we need to do a lot of the other things better. So that I just wanted to make those few comments, because I don't want people leaving here thinking there's only one side of a story. We need to get all of the sides together, and many good points are being made, which others need to hear as well. So I support the idea of having a broader discussion and a broader audience on these issues.
Thank you, Engineer Worm, for your comments, and we really appreciate that. Trevor, before I give you the opportunity to reply, what I find to be interesting in our discussion here this evening is that it would appear, and this is just from the onlooker looking on, that the coordinating efforts that is required seems to be absolutely void from the government side. And feeding back into the presentation about implementation deficit and the thought of implementing something so complex by 2030. My question to you, learned gentlemen, because Mr. Worm, you, as Mr. Browne, would have spent many years working for the utility, and there are many other experienced persons on here. I saw John on earlier. I know he was on the same panel with the FTC hearing. My question is, gentlemen, is that is the government equipped in terms of the professional aspect to coordinate such a mammoth undertaking? What is your point of view on this? And I'll start with you, Colonel Browne, and then I'll be interested in hearing from you, Mr. Worm.
Well, see, the answer to that question is the government is not, the government don't have the kind of expertise to do this, and they don't need to. The point that let me make a couple of things absolutely clear. You see, Barbados Lightning Power, in my opinion, my humble opinion, Barbados Lightning Power is the most valuable asset that Barbados currently owns. Barbados Lightning Power is the make or break of our future, because I started by pointing out the critical importance of energy to any society, and not only the development of the society, the survival of the society. The way that energy.
Not meant to cross you, Colonel, not meant to cross you, but I just want to clarify something you just said. Do we own the utility? Because you said it is the most.
So I was going to come to that. So,
Okay.
so this is the problem. This is so this gets to the heart of the dilemma we have in Barbados. The way that public utilities are intended to work is that the government creates this entity, gives a franchise to experts and a mandate to look after the electrical interests of the country in exchange for the monopoly that they get and the various benefits that they get. The expectation is that the expertise to take the country forward electrically or from an energy perspective is with that utility. Government is giving them a commission to do that, a handsome commission. Look at the returns that they get during COVID when everybody was making losses. They are guaranteed, and in exchange for this, they are meant to look after the interests of the country. Now, what has happened in Barbados? This worked well for 100 years. In 2013, the FTC allowed a foreign entity to acquire all of the shares of the Barbados Light and Power. And the board was configured. Previously, the board had people from government, from the NIS, private individuals, local Barbadians, RHI people, big ups like Stephen Warren, for example. And they made decisions. And obviously, you don't have to go far to see the kind of decisions that they would make. The questions that Graham asked about polls, somebody like Stephen would come to the board meeting and say, but this cannot work. This is what I want, this is what I expect. And that will filter through to the operations of the company. In 2013, the FTC allowed a situation to arise where the people who sit around that boardroom all reported to foreign concerns, whose focus would obviously different to mine would be, or Stevens would be. And the consequences of that is that Barbados no longer had access to the kind of utility that we enjoyed for 100 years, and that took us where we are. That's true. And the problem, I think that's the point Stephen was making. That's how I interpret what he said. Government attempted to compensate for this now by coming with compensation. Okay, if you own that, we're going to allow independent producers now to come in and counteract what you're doing. I'm saying that's not the solution. The solution is to bring that company back to its rightful position, representing the interests of this country. And that can easily be done. And they haven't done that. The expertise that we need is there. People like the engineers at Lenipar are top class engineers, no 2 ways about it. The resources available to them to take Barbados to where we want, you're not going to find better anywhere else. The problem that we have now is that they are driven by policies that in many cases, I could guarantee you, because I worked there for almost 40 years. I mean, there's not many people who understand their better than they do. The problem that many of the experts sitting in Lenipar may probably have now is a conflict between what they would actually like to do and what they're mandated to do because who their bosses are and because of what the directions are that come from the board. That's how the reality of life is. And the problem that the government of Barbados needs to address is that conflict that is imposed on the experts that we have residing in Light and Power. That is the problem that needs to be solved.
Mr. Worm, would you like to offer a comment?
Yeah, as I said, I don't always agree with Trevor, but I've agreed with a lot of what he said there. Except I don't think it's an ownership issue. While he may be right about the owners and what happened, and I've heard him on that, and I agree with a lot of what he says, it is unfortunate. But also having a big owner or a large organization like that has certain expertise, there's also advantages that it can bring to Barbados. And and that's how we looked at it when they first entered Barbados. The problem I see with the whole structure right now is that the licenses that are yet to be finalized are pointing at Light and Power's role as being changed substantially from what Trevor just described. So I don't think as the owners are directing it. I would say that definitely from the time that I've been having discussions with government since the last rate case back in 2010, while I was at Light and Power, it was all geared to breaking the monopoly. and they were all focused on light and power playing a substantially different role. And even in the new licenses that are being negotiated or have been negotiated and still not finalized, the whole role of light and power has changed. All of the planning for electricity is going to be focused in the Ministry of Energy. And they, as Trevor said, they don't have the capacity.
But Stephen, surely, from government's perspective, it is because they need to put Barbadian interests first, and that is not currently in place with light power as structure.
Well, I can't tell you what their motives are, but I could tell you because I have, and Trevor, to your earlier points about, you know, one side of government making one proclamation, as you mentioned, about a minister coming out one week and saying that everything is open. And 2 or 3 weeks later, light and power comes. And we knew, I mean, all of what light and power came up with, we knew 2 years ago was going to happen.
5 years ago.
Right. But from the time things started to happen, where people started to invest, we knew we would be where we are today. We didn't know we were going to be here in February 2023 exactly, but we knew we were going to reach this relatively soon, if not already. And a lot of what needed to be done could have been done if we had worked together. And the point I was making is at the end of the day, I would want to reiterate though, folks, that while we may talk about the bad things, there are also a lot of good things have happened. We now have about 11%, as I understand it, of our electricity being produced by renewable energy, which is as large or almost as large as anywhere else in the world as a percentage of their overall providing of their overall electricity capacity or requirements. So we have done some good things. The problem is we have not talked enough. We have come and there's been a lot of adversarial discussion. And I can tell you that from Light and Power's perspective, as Mr. Williams said earlier, if you want somebody, you rely on somebody, you don't alienate them. You want to work with them. You want to find the right way of working with them.
Yeah,
but you don't want to
Stephen, just a minute, Stephen. All due respect, you don't capitulate to people who would take up $100 million and take it out of the country.
Well, Trevor, you and me, we are on the exact same wavelength to that $100 million.
So what are you saying then? The truth is, right? The truth is, everything that the government has done is justified by what we see when we delve into the operations of the company under American control.
Yeah, but I don't agree that they did it because of that. That maybe they have that in the back of their mind. I think the objective is that government needed to break down the monopoly, whether it was Bajan owned or foreign owned. And that, because remember, we started these discussions before Amera became a major player. And I remember all of the discussions, even before the rate case in 2009, that there was always this focus on breaking the monopoly and how are we going to do it, right?
Stephen,
so I just say that I do not think it's an ownership issue. Whether that exacerbated it, I can't say. But I just want to finish and just say, ultimately, the government is putting themselves in a position where they are going to have to plan or to plan and to develop all the plans. Light and Power's role has changed. I have argued against it, just like Trevor. Bria has actually objected against the licenses, not because we don't like them or anything, but it is the point of what it's going to cost Barbados if the government is going to put themselves in a position to manage the electricity sector and be open to the same vagaries of any other ministry, where when something happens with finances, they're going to cut costs, and part of the cost they're going to cut is on the electricity future of this country. And I'm very concerned that when they make these decisions that they're going to plan it without the necessary competencies within the government to do it. As Trevor highlighted, I agree with him totally. I don't think government is positioned to do the things that they are asking themselves to do. And when they fall back, position is on Light and Power, and Light and Power said, but we don't have this responsibility. We have not been keeping in touch.
Just a minute, hold a minute. I'm the presenter here, right? So let me.
Oh, sorry. I think I've overextended my time.
Yes,
Trevor.
you did.
Sorry
And
about
let
that.
me explain why. Before you came, I took the trouble to explain that what worked in this world, not just Barbados, in the whole world, in developing the level of growth we've seen in electric power availability to the common man, is that utility concept. Across the world, this is not a Barbados thing, you know. Across the world, the concept of utility with monopoly powers, guaranteed returns, and public interests, so that the public had control of what they do, of how they're regulated. That philosophy is what has driven the successful growth of energy for the last 100 years. The idea that you could suddenly come with a competitive approach.
Trevor, I know you're.
Excuse me, sir. I just said to you that I am the person doing the presentation.
Just a minute.
You hold on a bit, and the chairman will tell you when you can talk. Okay. The point I was making, Stephen, is that it is this very monopoly philosophy that has been successful.
Right.
And this idea, and you're right, the government does not have the capability, the resources, the experience, especially to do the kind of transformation we're talking about, which is unprecedented by global standards. This, more than ever, you need a Light and Power working at its peak with its best people to make that work. The solution is not to compete. The solution is not to take it. The solution is to get Light and Power back to what a true utility with monopoly powers is, and with the responsibilities to perform for the residents of Barbados. That's the solution. Yeah. And that is what government can do, and they can do it with the stroke of a pen. I can show you my last slide, which tells you exactly what they can do that in 2 days.
Right. And so, but just to say, and I'm going to shut up shortly, but just to say that is your perspective, and I respect that. I would just say to you, I think a hybrid system can work. I think there's value in some level of competition, but there needs to be a level of control. For example, who is looking out for all of the installations that they are built with the same level of resiliency that Light and Power is building their plants?
Why are you arguing so? But you're saying the same thing. That I'm telling you, Stephen, that you're right. That is the problem. The solution is to go back to the situation where we don't have that problem.
I'm just saying to you, there are more than one solution or solutions to the problem. The question is, which is best for Barbados? And I just say to you that I don't want to cry down anyone in the Ministry of Energy, because the Ministry of Energy has done a very good job within the capacity that they have available. They have very few people, very little resources within them that are trying to do a mammoth task. So I'm just saying to you, for government to take that role will be very counterproductive for this country. And even to employ people to do that is going to be very, very difficult for them to sustain that level of expense.
How is that even on the table, Stephen? That's not even on the table. If you would listen to the presentation, what we're saying is that is a whole new philosophy that we need to go back to that actually worked for 100 years.
Yeah, and I'm saying I have no problem with moving ahead from and I think a hybrid can work, but it needs to be managed, and that is where I think we have failed in the process of management. So as I said, I think I've said too much already, but the point really is I would like to hope that what we get out of this is that we need a lot more dialogue, a lot more opportunities like this, and a lot more where people, and Trevor said it, is that when we speak out about something, people see you as the enemy rather than as their friend. Because sometimes, so sometimes, maybe as Trevor, maybe it's sometimes how I might come across to people in that, you know, I may say you're wrong and I'm right. They may think that way, but that is never my intention. My intention is, as I think yours is to say, I have a view. I want you to listen to my view. And then I want you to prove to me why your view is better than mine.
Yeah.
And yet maybe it's the way that we come across. And I would just say to you, I think BAPE has a tremendous role to play. And I would just say to you what I was told by someone in the ministry not that long ago, that every time that they have to go out to the market outside of Barbados to get engineers to do a lot of their studies. And there may be a good reason for it, because traditionally, the only people that were involved in studies of this nature were those at Light and Power. And even then, you know, at Light and Power, we were all within our discrete areas of operation. So we may not have the broad perspective of all of our detailed perspective on everything. But the point is, they're looking for engineers, and I think there's a big role for engineers to play in some of these developments here, and they need engineers to speak out. I've heard Omar Alahar and Tony Gibbs talk a lot about resiliency of systems and climate conditions and so on. As engineers, we need to be speaking out about things that we know about, and as Trevor is doing now, about how we move forward as a country and make sure that we help guide the structures that are put in place. I don't think government listens enough to the professionals personally, but I think we now have an opportunity, because I think they are asking and begging for input from people. And I think we should keep an eye out and make sure we are involved as possible to get some of these issues resolved. Let me say to you the last thing, Trevor, sorry about this. Energy storage is a very massive area, has tremendous implications for Barbados. We need people who understand the energy storage, and because as we implement it, it's going to be a vast, challenging thing for us, because there are so many issues related to it. And I would like to encourage engineers to get and understand these issues, so that when we move forward, we can address them properly and not be in a knee-jerk reaction. At 1 minute, somebody say energy storage is the thing, and somebody else comes and says, no, we have all these problems, we ain't going that way at all. We want to find what is the best way. So I'm looking forward to further dialogue with the community, with the engineers, and hopefully, because I'm a member of your association and a proud member of BAPE, haven't gotten involved enough, but I have enough on my plate now. So I just would encourage y'all next time to have a little bit, maybe focus on smaller portions and have that discussion and include Light and Power and other people that need to be involved as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Worm. And Colonel Browne, I would like to give you a closing comment, sir.
Okay, well, first of all, I would like to really thank all those who have participated, even those who just listened, because the goal here really is for us to get, this thing is so important that it is critically important that as many Barbadians as possible understand the issues that face us and get involved in asking questions to make sure that those who finally make the decisions actually think it all the way through and make the best decision for Barbados. Just in closing, there are a couple of things I want to say. One, I have complained a lot, often, and continuously. But I want to say that the new Minister of Energy, Minister Cummins, so far, we have been so impressed with the approach that she has taken, that it seems to me that if she had taken up this mantle a couple of years ago, we would have been in a completely different position as we speak. It is unfortunate that it is only now that we are seeing the kind of collaborative openness, listening to advice, seeking different views and trying to pull them together. Long overdue. But to balance against all the other things that I may have said, I want to say that one of the things that BAP and indeed the cooperative is pleased about is the approach that she has chosen to take, certainly in the early stages of her tenure in the ministry. And that we are optimistic that we may yet be able to pull this off. But it is a critical issue. is an issue that people can understand, need to understand, because I will continue to tell you, nothing else is more important. If this fails, Barbados fails, everything about Barbados. And if you want to know the consequences, just go online and check what is happening as we speak now in South Africa. And what happened in Australia over the last couple of months, what happened in Spain. Large resourceful countries that did not properly manage their energy transformation process, chaos. It is going to be worse in Barbados for reasons that one of the questions touch. We are not connected to anything. We are here by ourselves. We have to depend on ourselves. And all the more reason why we need to get our best experts who in this particular area happen to be in light and power, to be working on behalf of the people, the government, the country, Barbados. Thank you for this opportunity to actually share this, to raise concerns and to raise, even if I have to do it through some controversial statements. And me and Stephen have been quarreling for how many decades now? So whenever we talk about anything, we quarrel. So don't worry about two of us. But thank you all for being interested, for listening. And I encourage you to ask questions wherever you get a chance. Those of you who interact with senior people, raise the question, ask for answers, and encourage more discussions like this. Thank you very, very, very much for the opportunity, Vincent.
Colonel Browne, I want to thank you for coming on board this evening. I know it was short notice by myself, but I thought that the topic being so topical at this point in time in Barbados has this habit of a nine-day wonder, that it would be beneficial to all to have this interaction and discussion at this stage when it's fresh in everybody's mind. And certainly this is not an end, but certainly a beginning in terms of the conversations that need to be had, because it's not only around this particular issue, but around the Barbados national energy policy. As you said, where a bigger discussion definitely needs to take place as when we're looking at the overall plan for implementation. So I think we do have to push in all sectors to have that conversation and to really pry government out of their comfort zone to come to the public and really tell us what the plan is and how they plan to implement. And as you have said, and as Stephen has said, engage with the players in the market so that we can come to some consensus on this issue, which is of prime importance to Barbados and its future development. So I want to thank everyone for participating this evening. We've had a lively session. And that is the whole purpose of these sessions, is to educate and certainly to interact with our membership and with our visitors who come to these sessions. I ask that you look out. We have a couple sessions coming up in next month. We may have 2 webinars coming up next month. So keep an eye out for what we will be posting, and we invite you to participate in those events. Also, the Colonel may be doing some additional public relations in terms of the co-op getting their message out. So you can keep an eye out for those opportunities if you wish to interact further on this particular issue as we go forward together. Thank you all for joining. Please be reminded that you can call or contact the Secretariat to claim your CPD points for having participated and interacted in this session. Thank you very much, and I bid you a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, et al.
Good night, everyone.
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Trevor. Busy Stephen. Et al. Thanks.